Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MS Pearce. This is a Ukraine war news update, the second part thereof actually for the 19th of August 2025. I've already done an analysis of the meetings, now the dust has somewhat settled, that took place in the White House yesterday. Really important stuff. Please go and check that video out. I think it's a fair appraisal as to what was achieved and what wasn't achieved. On the one hand, you can see yesterday's events as something of a nothing burger. There was nothing of great concrete value that came out other than discussed a meeting between Putin and Zelensky that may happen within 2 weeks, and security guarantees where the US are coordinating them. But the real, I think, benefit from yesterday's meetings was that the US seems to be somewhat back on side and operating in cahoots with, that's a bit of a pejorative word, in tandem with Europe and Ukraine to some degree. And that's an important pivot because, what took place at Alaska was deeply embarrassing, and it looked like Trump had been completely manipulated by Putin, and Putin knew how to trigger Trump, etc., etc. But some of that might have been undone with the meetings that took place yesterday. So anyway, go and check that analysis out. We have the Ukrainian General Staff figures for the Russian losses for the day before. All the usual caveats apply. You can find them linked in the description below. 890 personnel lost is a fairly low number comparatively speaking. We're now below 900. We have 66 artillery systems and yet 0 tanks, 0 troop carrying AFVs. So wow, the Ukraine is still obviously trying hard to take out Russian artillery, whether it be towed artillery or self-propelled guns or heavy mortars or self-propelled mortars as well. So include the mortars in on that. 1 multiple launch rocket system, 123 vehicles and fuel tanks shows that the Russians are still utilizing vehicles to attack, not just in logistics. I suggest that they are attacking mainly using motorbikes and buggies and whatnot. 66 artillery pieces being taken out is a really high number though. And 1 piece of special equipment. We'll come and look at Andrew Perpetua's losses. We have a couple of those to look at today. There's a few bits to discuss first. So first of all, in terms of personnel, 1,000 fallen soldiers have been returned to Ukraine. I presume that they've given back the same amount. But anyway, among them 5 soldiers who died in Russian captivity despite being listed for exchange. Russian captivity kills. But good to see that some bodies have been repatriated there. Now, Ukrainian soldiers successfully stormed Russian positions near Petrivka in Pokrovsk direction and took prisoners. So we have a video here of Russian prisoners of war. That suggests that the Ukrainians are still having success clearing out the area around Pokrovsk where the Russians had infiltrated. That's the 82nd Separate Airborne Assault Brigade there operating. And indeed, talking of which, Euromaidan Press reports on the Institute for the Study of Wars a synopsis that Ukraine has recaptured villages near Dobropilya, cutting off Russian troops at the base of the penetration, so down here at the neck, as well as having cut off 2 bunny ears at the top here. Russia's infiltration is stalling as Kiev moves faster on both flanks. So the Ukrainians having continued success there in flushing out the Russians. Okay. Now, let's go and look at personnel numbers in terms of recruitment. Max 25 reports from Important Stories, which is, I think, is it an exiled Russian outlet? Anyway, the rate of recruitment for military service under contract in Russia has dropped to a 2-year low. And this is incredibly important. In total, in the first half of 2025, 127.5 thousand people received contract payments, 40,000 less than in the same period in 2024. That's it. That's a really important statistic there. That if these people are not being recruited at the numbers that they need, then that's going to have an impact on the front line. In the second quarter of 2025, 37.9 thousand people signed a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. This is at least 2 years. It says, it hasn't finished there. I'm not quite sure. It's a Google Translate, but you can see that the latest quarter 2 of 2025 is very low. I mean, you're going back to quarter 2 of 2023 to see a lower recruitment rate in terms of contract soldiers. Now, of course, or contract payments. Now, of course, there might be other ways of seeing recruits of understanding recruits, but that goes kind of against other indications, such as the recruitments being ahead of where they were hoping. So, we do have a bit of a mix of data sets or data claims. But the takeaway from this is good news for Ukraine, really. Then we have, not as I reported. So Syrskyi said that the armed forces of Ukraine are creating a new branch of troops themselves, assault troops. By 2026, the MOD plans to conclude 3,500 contracts with citizens of Ukraine, 1,000 with foreigners, and 2,500 through direct mobilization every month. Wow. So that looks like a 6, 7, 8,000 recruits a month being signed up. And obviously that's not a lot compared to what Russia is Russia was supposed to be recruiting 30 to 40,000. Yet if you look at those numbers, they're like, yeah, that's not happening. In the second quarter. So that's, 3 months. That's 37.9 thousand people signing a contract. Now you've got conscription and you may have other types, but that is really quite low. Now here, what's interesting for me is 1,000 foreigners a month, every month. Now I've long said they need to get more foreigners fighting, because that's what Russia does, and that's how Russia is able to support their war effort. So that's good news to me. I like the look of that, but that's by 2026 though. That's a long way off. Oh, it's by 2026. That's 6. Well, actually, no. I go back. I was getting my years a bit wrong. I thought we're in 2024. No, by 2026. So that's all right then. That is what we've got. That's 4 months to get that sorted. So yeah. Interesting. Now, Syrskyi has already said, and I did a whole video on this, that the Russians have been defeated, in his words, in Sumy Oblast. So I find that an interesting way of framing it. It does seem like if they are indeed pulling out troops and moving them to Zaporizhia direction, then they have failed in their objectives. And if they failed in their objectives, effectively, they have been defeated. So yeah. No territorial gains in 2 months up there, with elite paratroopers and Marines now being redeployed to elsewhere. And indeed, Kyiv Independence reports that Russia has occupied less than 1% of Ukraine's territory since November 2022. So it's sometimes good to get our perspective correct again. It's easy to say, oh, Russia have been doing this and doing that, and they've been taking that, and they're almost taking this place, and Pokrovsk is under threat. And of course, it's terrible, and they are taking territory, and they are destroying entire towns as a form of liberation. But since November 2022, the Russian forces have only captured 5,842 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, accounting for about 0.97% of the country's landmass, according to Deep State. So, it's come at an incredible cost, and they haven't taken what they would clearly have hoped to have taken. They were thinking of taking Kyiv, right? And look at how far they got there. So, Ukraine has done an incredible job, I guess. Right, okay, August the 16th and 17th, we're now on the 19th, so we're going back a few days. Let's quickly go through the loss list from Andrew Perpetua's point of view. We have quite a few Russian losses there, including a fair bit of artillery, and actually a better day for the Ukrainians than the Russians. So let's start with the Ukrainians, as we normally do. We're going to ignore the surveillance and comms, and actually some of the electronic warfare equipment, although some of them will be quite decent, no doubt. And same with the surveillance and comms, without going through each individual piece. Some of it may be more significant, but generally we're talking Starlinks and comms equipment that's fairly standard. UGVs as well, some of them are lovely pieces of kit, $50,000 worth maybe, but it's not quite a mine-resistant ambush protection vehicle, but you're going to see more of them. So anyway, from the traditional equipment point of view, a couple of bits of artillery, a single IFV destroyed, which is a YPR 765 probably. We've got 2 M113s, 1 abandoned, some MRAPs, general stuff, a few ATVs, motorcycles, buggies and whatnot, and then civilian vehicles. So, quite a few civilian vehicles, admittedly, although not as many as we've seen previously sometimes, but enough there to to realise that both sides are losing civilian vehicles at quite a rate, but nothing too much to worry about. Now, the Russians here have more equipment on the list, so a better day for the Ukrainians initially, but they also have an air defense system, and Pantsir S1 has been damaged, as according to Andrew Perpetua, with a Dart drone there. So that's good news. We have a single UGV. We've got a Type 75 multiple launch rocket system, which is a North Korean one, destroyed. We've got a BM-21 multiple launch rocket system damaged, and a bunch of D-30s and a couple of self-propelled howitzers. Then we have a fair few tanks here. So we've got 7 tanks on the list, most of them identified, but we have a couple of T-80s and a T-72, most of them destroyed as well. 6 out of 7 irretrievably lost. All 4 APCs irretrievably lost, all destroyed. MTLBs, all of them. And then we have quite a lot of trucks. Again, we've seen that recently. More trucks from the Russians on the list. Kamaz, Ural, and whatnot. And then we're down to ATVs. A lot of motorcycles, some quads, and a buggy. And then a lot of civilian vehicles as well. Just over half of them destroyed. So the Russians having a worse day of it on that particular day. The Pantsir S1 being damaged is a high value bit of kit, but nothing insanely bad otherwise, just sheer numbers there. Then we look on the next day. This is the 17th, so the Russian losses, nothing crazy there. Again, a few tanks though. And then we have on the Ukrainian lists, it's about the same probably. Russians losing a few more bits of kit actually, so marginally worse day initially for the Russians. Let's go to the Ukrainians. We're going to ignore surveillance comms and UGVs again. We're going to go to a single howitzer. We've got Leopard 105 destroyed. Don't see too many of them destroyed. I wonder how many they're using in close combat, really, or at all. You know, tanks are a funny thing at the moment. You know, how much are both sides using them as tanks? So a couple of tanks on the list, including that Leopard 105, 3 APCs. M113 damaged, Snatch Land Rover. M113 destroyed, Snatch Land Rover damaged. We've got some MRAPs, including a British provided Mastiff, all 4 destroyed or irretrievably lost. And we've got quite a few infantry mobility vehicles, 7 of those. Humvees mainly, most of them destroyed, all but 1 destroyed. Husky, another British one there, thrown in, also destroyed. We've got 3 trucks. We've got 5 ATVs, a couple of buggies, motorcycle, and a couple of quads. And then civilian vehicles again. So nothing too much to write home about, but I think the Russians have probably lost a tad more over those 2 days, and the Pantsir S1 is a higher value bit of kit than anything else. There's a burning train between Uruzhaina and Tokmak that the Ukrainians have hit this morning. So this is something that is doing the rounds. Quite a bit of footage to suggest this was a major hit. A Russian fuel train there, you can see it on fire in multiple places. And that's looking bad. A lot of smoke coming for that, as you can well imagine. We have from Special Kherson Cat a bit more detail of where that was hit as well. Location, as you can see, just below sort of Robotina. That's Malatok, Machka, Orakiv, south of there, on the way to Tokmak, which is probably that junction there. So that is on the train line there, which is a very important train line. You take that out, that's significant. That's going to hurt your logistics across this whole region for a good few days. So this is a really important strike, I would suggest. FPV drone strike on the fuel train, and you can imagine that quite a few drones have hit this. For that to be on fire in all of those different places, I would assume that there were many FPVs that hit it. Now there is. I'm just trying to work out. We've got about a 50-second video here, just trying to work out how many drones this entails. It might just be a single drone. You can see it. Oh, it might be 2 actually, if I remember. Now it doesn't look like a fuel train initially though, and it looks like it's being shunted. Is that the locomotive there with it shunting one and then pulling the rest, or is a whole lot being shunted? But as you can see, these aren't fuel. These are carrying aggregates by the looks of it. And the drone comes along to the front, and then it passes a low bed thing that it signifies 2 things are on board. Now, if I pause there, these, I don't know. It's not like a big fuel tank. If that is, I don't know what they are. answers on a postcard, please. But it looks fairly significant because there's quite an intricate setup there going on. And then possibly going forward, you have the locomotive there. Yeah. And a drone then comes in from another direction and then hits what looks like those two things at the front there. And then I think you've got the fuel cards further back. So anyway, that's what we see from that video. So we go back to previous images. There's your locomotive by the looks of it, shunting that thing, and then the two other bits were further back, weren't they? But actually it's much, you had your section of aggregates there, and it looks like behind that's where you got your fuel cards. Anyway, good news that's been taken out. Anyway, Ukrainian aviation has destroyed an enemy assault group that's been hiding in the basement of the school in Tetkino in Kursk Oblast with a precision strike using the AASM-250 hammer bombs, the guided glide bombs. Again, the Ukrainians are using these to great effect, and I just wanted to include that. There's nothing particularly different than we've seen. But I mentioned last night on the live stream with Greg and Prof. Gerdes that my opinion is the Ukrainians should... I mean, if I was in charge of supporting Ukraine, yeah, they need artillery ammunition. Yeah, they need all this. But if I was someone like... If I was the Swedes... Right, and we know that they put something in place already. So they part of their previous military aid package to Ukraine has been getting spares for Gripen planes sorted out and support for Gripens. So it's going to happen. But my opinion is that the success of the Russians at Avdiivka was contingent upon their use of guided glide bombs along the front line. If the Ukrainians had another... They've done all this work of taking out air defense pieces of kit, right? So they have degraded Russia's air defense, and they're clearly able to get their planes close enough to the front lines to be able to use guided glide bombs fairly freely, right? So they're not losing planes to Russian air defenses. The times that the Ukrainians have lost planes recently has been to do with shooting down drones, further back, or malfunction with the Mirage recently. But they haven't lost any in doing combat runs as far as we can see. As far as we know. So, my opinion would be the Ukraine could do with 70 planes. Thank you very much. 100 planes, however many, but let's just pick a random number of 70. Let's get F-16s on the cards. And there were claims that something that took place yesterday was that the Ukrainians had put in a bid for American equipment, and you're going to assume that's going to be Patriot missile launchers, etc., etc. But also there was a claim about planes, and I need to look into this. So it wouldn't surprise me if the Ukrainians wanted to buy some planes off the Americans, some old F-16s or something. Like I think they need 70 planes. I think they need Mirages, as many Mirages as the French can get them. They need Gripens, and the Swedes know that this is good. Surely they know this is good because you put in a bid, someone buys like 20 Gripens, right? 30 Gripens for Ukraine, then that secures jobs in Sweden, and that then locks in Ukraine to maintenance from Sweden for however long they use Gripens for. I mean, that is an absolute boon. Now, Saab are going to be chomping at the bit, surely, for that to happen. But actually, from a military point of view, Ukraine need to be firing these guided glide bombs. You need those 70 planes, and you need the munitions to go with them. And if you can include Meteor missiles as well, then Ukraine would be in a really strong position. You get a bunch more F-16s, a bunch more Mirage 2005Fs, and you get a bunch of Gripens, 70 planes to add to whatever they've got already, with the MiG-29 still going hard on dropping bombs like this, and then you can affect the front lines. That would be a game changer. Greg admitted it would be a game changer last night, because it would be, because suddenly you can hit the Russian troops with guided glide bombs in a way that the Russians were hitting the Ukrainian troops, which lost them Avdiivka. Look at where the Russians have succeeded and say we want to replicate that if we can, if it doesn't involve the death of huge amounts of people, and it won't, because it's flying relatively. I mean, it's relatively safe, and if you do lose a plane, you're losing a single person, right? Okay, it takes a long time and money to train these people up, but you're not losing 1,000 people in a frontline maneuver. planes are the key here. They're absolutely the key. And it's why NATO's entire doctrine is set up upon air domination. You go in, you do your suppression of enemy air defense, your destruction of enemy air defense. You then move from contested airspace to airspace that you control, air advantage to air dominance. And if you dominate the skies, you can dominate the ground. That's what the Ukrainians need. They really need planes. That's my opinion. I'm no military expert, though. Right. Okay. Russia went hard last night. A couple of things to note here. We were expecting them to go hard last night, but I said to Prof. Gerdis last night, given the nature of the symbolism here, so these are talks between Zelensky and Trump and Europe and Zelensky and Trump, right? You are going to see the Russians hit as much as they can. Last night should be the most drones and missiles they can possibly fire, in my opinion. If you don't see anything that looks like 600 drones and missiles, like 100 plus missiles and 500-600 drones, you know Ukraine has succeeded in stopping the Russians' ability to fire those munitions. You would if you could, you aren't, so you can't. The Russians last night would have given everything they could, in my opinion. They upped it significantly from what it was previously. So over the last few weeks, it's been fewer than 100 drones a night. Then 2 nights ago, it's 100 whatever it was, but not a massive amount. And it's a lot, but compared to what the Russians were doing. And then last night, your big night, 10 missiles and 270 drones, sorry. Now, as hard as last night was, and there were some places that were horrifically hit, it wasn't easy. The Russians did do damage, but they're not sending the numbers they were sending in. The Ukrainians have had success there. And in fact, this has come out today. After the SBU's spiderweb, Russian strategic aviation launches half as many missiles. So the intensity of missile attacks has decreased from 33 to 19 missiles per strike. Russia is forced to transfer surviving bombers to distant airfields, some of which will require repairs. Depends what you call per strike, because actually we're not seeing 19 missiles unless you include what goes on right throughout a 24-hour period. Because what often happens is they do, like last night, there were 10 missiles that were sent. 5 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 5 KH-101 cruise missiles. But then throughout the day, there'll be some more ballistics sent in, and a bit here and a bit there. But at any one time, I don't think you're even getting 19. It's not moved from 33 to 19. So it's actually fewer than that, but that might be spread over more time. So it's not just the production of the missiles, evidently. What the SBU, Max 25 is saying, I don't know where he's getting this from, is that Operation Spiderweb that took out the planes has actually really badly affected the Russian ability to send missiles. So I think their production has been hit badly in terms of both drones and missiles. They've hit the supply chain, they've hit components manufacturers, they've hit gunpowder plants and explosive factories. They've microchips to explosives to the assembly. All of that has been targeted by the Ukrainians, and I think you're seeing the success of that. Like last night was bad for the Ukrainians, but it could have been absolutely horrific, and it wasn't. So while negotiations were taking place in Washington, Russia carried out a massive attack on Ukraine. Russian terrorists used 270 drones and decoys, 5 Iskander-M ballistic missiles and 5 KH-101 cruise missiles. The strikes targeted Lubny and Kremenchuk. The goal was the oil and gas infrastructure. So you can see they were really going for a few places: Poltava, Kremenchuk, and much closer to front line is that Sloviansk there as well. So really going for some very particular places. And I would assume in Poltava it was energy infrastructure that was aimed at. Kremenchuk, don't know exactly what was there. Let's go and have a look then. So Russia's attack started while talks were ongoing in Trump's office. Putin behaved leading up to Alaska. So he was actually, he didn't fire he didn't launch wide scale attacks on Ukraine in lead up to Alaska, because I guess he recognized how important that was and he didn't want to upset the apple cart there. But then when it comes to Ukraine and Europe speaking to Trump, he's happy to upset the apple cart. So leading up to Alaska, he was terrified that the ultra-fragile economy would collapse if he annoyed Trump, and Trump then whacked on sanctions. Having played the US president, the war criminal knew it was fine to carry on the bombing, says Tim White here. And you can see that's, I think, Kremenchuk this morning. 85% of drones were stopped, 230 of them were intercepted. So that's pretty good, but 44 hits did occur in 16 places. So a lot of stuff did get through. It has to be said, actually, the missiles, we actually had two Iskander-M ballistic missiles were taken out, so that only 3 got through, and 4 out of 5 of the cruise missiles got through. Were intercepted. So that gives only 4 out of the 10 missiles getting through, which is not too shabby, especially considering ballistic missiles were used there. Okay, so what else do we have? We're going to go to Tim White later, saying biggest attack in Ukraine was on Poltava Oblast, but little more could be reported at the time for operational security. Now we can see some of the problems facing Kremenchuk and Lubny, 100 kilometers north near the border with Chernihiv. The column of smoke stretches to Kherson. Wow. So really, so that's north of Kryvyi Rih. So if we go back to the map here, that is going to be this one. That's Kremenchuk. And you've got, some serious issues going on there. So that was hit. Then black smoke filled the air this morning in Kremenchuk after at least 20 warheads hit the area. So it's 20 drones and missiles. Meanwhile, a warning has been issued in the Poltava region as many unexploded cluster munitions have been found already. So using cluster munitions to harm civilians as much as possible, one would think. But it's, yes, something definitely was hit. And it was looking pretty, it is looking pretty smoky around there. Russia's attack started while talks were ongoing in Trump's office. Yep, as I've said. What else do we have? So now to Donetsk, a lot of news from there. First to overnight attacks on Sloviansk. This is, of course, one of the cities already liberated in 2014, which unforgivably Trump is trying to give away to Putin. 1 woman was injured, 2 ballistic missiles hit an industrial zone. Some images coming out from there, but Sloviansk being much closer to the front line means that they are somewhat unable to intercept the Shahed drones and missiles that are thrown at it because you don't have enough time to react. Massive attack on Poltava region last night, says Gerashchenko. Thankfully, no one was injured. About 1,500 people are without electricity, and Kremenchuk is covered in black smoke. Moving on, we have Kremenchuk filled with smoke again there. I mean, it's almost beautiful in a way that obviously smoke and pollution makes sunrises and sunsets all the more striking, but actually it's pollution that does that, sadly. So Kremenchuk is filled with smoke. Residents are asked to close their windows. They hit everything at once with Shaheds, ballistics and cruise missiles. Administrative buildings of energy enterprises were damaged. Gas storage facilities in Poltava region were also hit. So this is definitely an attack on the energy infrastructure in Ukraine. That's the main, I think, those were the main targets last night. So in Free Donetsk, multiple explosions could also be seen this morning in Konstantinivka. Russia repeatedly hitting the left bank as well. I presume left bank. Not sure if that means down in Kherson. I understand. No, that can't be. So left bank, I don't know, of the river there. I understand 3 people have been killed in Konstantinivka, another 4 civilians and 2 rescuers injured after recent attacks. 7 apartment blocks were hit and 19 private houses. Russia at least unleashed 6 aerial bombs and 3 drone strikes there. And it looks predominantly like residential or commercial, or I don't know, properties were targeted here. And this is Dobropilya, where, you know, you're getting closer to the front line here. And, you know, again, it looks like civilian infrastructure was taken out. Aerial bombs smashed into a purely residential area of the town of Dobropilya. Another 4 bombs and FPV drone struck Druzhkivka. So that's the Konstantinivka, Chazivyara, Druzhkivka, Sloviansk, Kramatorsk set of settlements and nearby villages there. In Raiska, 21 houses were damaged when 3 Kub 250 glide bombs hit there. Another guided glide bomb hit Krasny Kut, and Druzhkivka was attacked by FPV drones. So Really tough time for the settlements nearer to the front line. And here we've got Pokrovsk, a video postcard from there showing you the massive destruction done to Pokrovsk as it has just has been absolutely shellacked. This is what freedom looks like in Russia, although this is not Russia, this is Ukraine, but this is what Russian freedom looks like. This is liberation via destruction. And that is repeated right across Pokrovsk. It is tough there. So really difficult night, and it's worth noting that 2 nights ago, this came out just after I did my hits and losses yesterday, but the SOCAR oil facilities and gas facilities have been targeted in the Odessa Oblast on both the Danube River in terms of a gas compression, I think, facility there, and lots of infrastructure being hit around there. And this is Azerbaijani owned. SOCAR are the Azerbaijani state oil concern. They've got gas and oil facilities getting taken out. And this was one in 2 nights ago in Odessa. And this is terrible. If we were seeing this in Russia, we'd be like, what an amazing hit. This is great. The Russians have really taken one there. This happened in Ukraine. So the Ukrainians really suffering in the Odessa region there as a result of Russian strikes 2 nights ago. Now, what did the Ukrainians do last night? Actually, it's been fairly quiet for the Ukrainians for a number of nights, with the odd success here and there. So last night, the only one I can really find out about is Volgograd, where the Lukoil oil refinery has been hit again. The refinery, Russian oil company Lukoil's second largest one, is a major producer of petroleum products in Russia's southern federal district. But I'm pretty sure this has been hit just recently anyway. Drones attacked the Volgograd refinery at night. The governor said the fire was caused by falling debris, of course. Carpet plan. So the closing of the airports was implemented at the Volgograd airport, but you can see that one would assume quite a few drones hit. So quite often what we see is a single drone, 2 drones hit and causing quite a bit of damage if they are successful. But sometimes you're thinking, why didn't you hit with like 10 drones? And that looks like, if the firm's data is to be interpreted in this way, then it looks like a good number, good half dozen drones at least found their mark, maybe even more. So Volgograd's Lukoil refinery is burning again. A drone attack on the 19th of August followed the one just 5 days ago on the 14th of August. That forced it to shut. Meanwhile, Russia claims it repelled a massive assault. This is kind of what I would expect to see, actually, which is, and like I've said to you before, hit it again now. Like you've taken it out. How about properly take it out? I mean, really take it out. If that's the second largest refinery, this is really significant. What you're seeing here, so 5 days later, another set of drones hitting the Lukoil facility that had already been shut down. This to me is an attempt to really properly take it out. So you're done there, mate. You ain't coming back there. That's not being fixed within a year. Like the previous damage done, shut it down. And some people are hopefully saying, a month it'll be back online. Other experts, and I shared you Will Teal's thread, is like, no, you're not fixing that in months and months and months. And then if you hit it again within a week and you do that much damage, then at some point Russia's got to go, we're screwed. And then that really hurts. That's the second biggest refinery. That's going to hurt Russia big time economically. We also hear that overnight, 2 nights ago, I think this was 2 nights ago, not 18th to 19th, but 17th to 18th. Ukraine struck the Nikolskoye oil pumping station in Russia's Tambov region, sparking a fire and halting oil transfers through the Druzhba pipeline. No wonder Hungary's foreign minister started squawking again today. So this was 2 nights ago, and then yesterday, Hungary were complaining that the Druzhba oil pipeline and certain areas have been screwed. So this is very important. So Slovakia has also halted oil deliveries via the Druzhba pipeline. Transpetrol confirmed. Earlier, Ukraine's general staff reported a strike on Nikolskoye pumping station in Russia, which completely stopped transit through the pipeline. So this is a pipeline that goes through Ukraine here and then down into Hungary and Slovakia. But actually, or is that Slovakia and Hungary? No, it's Hungary and Slovakia. But it is one that actually goes through Ukraine. But what they've done is destroyed the Druzhba connector and infrastructure up there to stop the oil passing through Ukraine and then getting to Hungary and to Slovakia. And I don't think, does this pipeline is not working anyway. Nonetheless, this is very important. But Hungary have definitely spat dummy there. Now they are kicking off that they are not getting deliveries. Hungary relied on Russian oil. Ukraine turned off the tap, says Euromonitor Press. Druzhba pipeline is fully offline after Ukrainian drones hit deep into Russia, disabling the Nikolskoye 1 pumping station yesterday. Budapest complained. Kiev answered, talk to your friends in Moscow. And actually, that is referring to Andrei Sybiha, the foreign minister for Ukraine, who actually replied to Peter Shihato online and said, blah, blah, blah. You know, it was a really good response to saying, look, if you want to complain to anyone, mate, go and complain to your mates in Russia. And it's a real put down. And it's absolutely true. You know, you wouldn't be having this issue if Russia hadn't invaded Ukraine. So this is on Russia, mate. Right, we then hear that long-range SBU drones have destroyed 2 ammunition depots of the Russians in Bilokorokina in Luhansk region, so up the north of Ukraine. The village is located on an important railway branch, which supplies ammunition from Russia to the front line, in particular the Pokrovsk direction. So really good news there that the drones have not just been flying into Russia, but have also been used to take out key places inside occupied territories of Ukraine. And then finally, going back to the Ryazan elastic gunpowder plant that blew up, the death toll there has risen to 24. Just really bad news for the Russians in that area. It blew up 5 years ago. I talked about this, so we don't quite know how it got blown up. Was it drones, missile, careless smoking, some mechanical failure or something? Bearing in mind that while you might want to blame, Russian mechanical failure or whatever, Russian mistakes for the death of these workers, to try and get away from putting that on the Russians, although I think they are legitimate military targets, and that's been understood since the Second World War. Having said that, there is a high probability that it was a Russian mistake, because it's happened before. So 5 years ago, before the war in Ukraine, 17 people were killed there in another similar explosion. So, yeah, who knows? Anyway, as a massive explosion that took place there and destroyed the facility there. And whatever caused it, great news for Ukraine. Right. This is a really long one. Do I have time to go through it? This is a CryptoWiki thread, but I think it is quite indicative and revealing. So a Russian forensic specialist was sent to Ukraine and made a tank platoon commander with no previous experience and little training. After being seriously injured and seeing many abuses perpetrated by officers, he deserted and has since told his story. So this guy, Astakov, originally trained in criminology and joined the Russian police in the 2010s, but quit after 4 years after he realized that the people there were rotten from top to bottom. Wow. This left him with serious financial problems, so he joined the Russian army. He obtained a posting to the Arctic island of Novaya Zemlya, where soldiers can attract double pay because of the difficult conditions. His remote posting was not immediately affected by Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in Feb 2022, but his contract was due to expire in August 2022, but he was threatened with imprisonment if he did not sign a renewal. In September, he was promoted to an officer rank on account of his higher education and was sent for training at Molino in the Nizhny Novgorod region. He was shocked by the chaos and disorganization he witnessed. The newly mobilized men and volunteers were being given no training before being sent to the front line. Quote, no training or drills. A group arrived, they dressed them, shod them, put shoes on them, and took them away like a conveyor belt. Although he himself was reluctant to go to war, he observed how mobilized men Mobilized men who objected to the war were treated as, quote, cowards and enemies of the people for the command. They were sent by force straight to the front lines, end quote. He was arbitrarily made a tank platoon commander. Astakov told his superiors that he had never dealt with tanks and was not ready for the responsibility. Quote, they started feeding me lies, saying that I wasn't the only one and that they were going to send me to St. Petersburg for a month of training. I still didn't sign the documents to accept the position and went to the leadership with a request to leave me with the training unit since I don't know how to fight and I'm not ready. They also told me that they would train me, but all the positions in the unit were filled. The only thing they offered was a choice between a tank platoon commander and a motorized rifle platoon commander. With a heavy heart, I chose the tank platoon. End quote. He was sent for training, but it was farcically inadequate and very badly managed. Quote, it was even more chaotic there. Everyone was drinking, there was filth and rats, the training was superficial. They spent a couple of days explaining how to start the system in the tank, fired a couple of shots at targets and fired automatic weapons. When I returned to the unit, I said that we didn't understand what we were doing, and the leadership started to look at me askance, like their attitude changed immediately. They said I would be taught everything there at war. I realized that it was impossible to come to an agreement on a human level, so I went to Rostov prosecutor's office with a complaint that I was being sent to command without any knowledge of the technology. The chief, a colonel, immediately started with attacks and threats that I was a coward, a deserter, and I should be put in jail. A sympathetic captain persuaded the colonel to let Astakov stay at the training ground for more training and to help out with paperwork. He stayed there for a couple of weeks before being sent to Krasny Luch in Ukraine on the 10th of March 23. He was assigned to the 8th Tank Company near Makivka. A notoriously brutal commander with his call sign Viking took over in May, and conditions immediately worsened. The entire company were drunks, he said. I was transferred to the commander's reinforcement with another platoon commander to keep an eye on the drunks. The leadership immediately said I would be, quote, responsible for the personnel, that they needed to, quote, show that I was a commander, quote, make them obey by any means, not drink and not do nonsense. I was shocked. Talked frankly with the guys, asked why they were drinking, and they signed contracts for 6 months thinking to serve and come back. Some had loans, families, some wanted to finish building a house, but the contracts turned out to be indefinite. Some had already served for 9 months, some for a year, and people could not stand it. They drank because their psyche failed. Or, of course, I did not beat anyone, but put moral pressure on anyone. I tried to solve everything humanely. Drug and alcohol abuse is endemic in the Russian army, says Chris Owicki. These soldiers lived at first in an abandoned stable, but were kicked out into a nearby forest because of the constant drinking. They were told to live there like dogs in dugouts and shelters. They had to construct themselves. The leadership demanded that people were beaten, he said, tied to trees and put in pits so that they would not drink. They said, otherwise we will send you and them on assaults with a one-way ticket. And we've seen many videos of people being tied to trees and put in zindans in the ground. The tank itself became Astakov's home, with its crew forbidden to shelter despite constant drone attacks and shelling. They drove us day and night. We lived on the tank with no food or washing facilities. I rode on the turret and they wouldn't let me leave without orders. And when there was a return flight incoming fire, after a couple of weeks, I told the battalion commander that I would simply be killed on the turret and agreed to sit at a distance with a radio. But when the company commander returned from leave, he said, that's all nonsense. You have to sit on the tank. It's more fun that way. He was a bad guy. He loved the adrenaline rush. The T-80 tanks themselves were old and chronically unreliable. Quote, they were half dead. There were 5 of them. 2 didn't work. We took parts from them when the others broke down. So this is a really important part, and this is a part of this story that other people have analysed. Like, T-80 tanks themselves old, chronically unreliable. They were half dead. There were 5 of them. 2 didn't work. We took parts from them when the others broke down. So they cannibalised 2 out of 5 of the tanks to keep 3 of them alive. And they broke down constantly. We repaired everything ourselves. There were no tools in the whole regiment, but they constantly demanded that we drive under the threat of being sent on the storm. The second platoon commander, Andrei Sinitsyn, began arguing with the battalion commander over stupid orders that people were being sent to stand in an open field all day under drones and shells, and they were being treated like animals. Viking drove up in a car and sent them to the stormtrooper unit Storm Z. Men who displeased Viking were tied to trees or tanks or thrown into pits in the ground for days on end. Others were beaten up. In one instance, a man whose morale had broken refused to fight. The battalion commander came, beat him up, handcuffed him to the tank for 3 days, but he started drinking again. The battalion commander freaked out, sent him to Storm Z. Before that, he lined up the whole company and said, this jerk won't serve here. He needs to be sent to Storm so that he dies there along with the prisoners. Astakov says that everyone in his unit regarded the war as Putin's nonsense and were motivated purely by survival. His fiancée Christina travelled to Ukraine with volunteers delivering supplies and stayed there, living in a tent near the front line so that she could see Astakov every weekend. She had the opportunity to meet his colleagues and assess their attitude towards the war. Christina says, quote, among the ordinary guys, no one supported the war at all. Out of 10 people I spoke to, not one wanted to fight, and there was no violence inside the company. There was no spirit of killers, and in response, they were called cowards and beaten. There was no justice there, no humane attitude. It is unrealistic to come to an agreement with the command. Everything is forced with intimidation. At the slightest provocation, we will send you to Storm. That is why people begin to despair. It's unrealistic to remain mentally stable and adequate there. In October 2023, Astakov's tank was blown up during the offensive on Avdiivka. He was the only member of the crew to survive. He was knocked out and woke up to find himself on fire, sustaining serious injuries, a badly burned face, ears and hands. I mean, that looks horrific. And fragmentation injuries to his knee and eye. After walking 1.5 kilometers for help, he was evacuated to Rostov. Despite the severity of his injuries and post-traumatic stress disorder, he was not granted disability and was rated as fit to continue commanding tanks. He decided to desert and leave Russia during a 2-month convalescence at home during March to May 2024. With the help of a distant group Go to the Forest, Astakov fled to Armenia. So this is a very common way of getting out. Georgia, Armenia and other places. He is supporting himself with odd jobs while aspiring to travel to a safer country where he can get treatment to restore the sight in his damaged eye. Christina is still in Russia. Ivan Chuvilyev of Go to the Forest says that Astakov was lucky to get the opportunity to leave. Quote, once in Ukraine, they can't just up and run away. They are in occupied territory where the FSB, Russian Guard and military police checkpoints are everywhere. Everything is in plain sight there. For an unsuccessful attempt at desertion, a soldier can be sent to a pit, a basement, in a storm or reset to 0, executed. And they desert from hospitals. It's a safe method. There are also taxi drivers, locals who are ready to take people through checkpoints in their cars, but this is also very risky. That's why few people flee their units, except perhaps prisoners who have nothing to lose. Fascinating. Sorry, it's a really long one, but I thought that was such a fascinating account that gives us, and that's going back to 2023 and 2024. Imagine what the morale must be like now in 2025, this far into the war. Goodness me. Right, Russian gasoline prices have hit record highs after drone strikes have shut refineries. Russia is one of the world's largest energy producers, relies heavily on oil exports to fund its full-scale war against Ukraine, so this is obviously very important. Now, Ukraine, on the other hand, has announced, and this is what I suggested before, my 2 suggestions have been increase nuclear power output because the Russians are going to be reluctant to strike nuclear generators, nuclear power plants. Right, so it kind of safeguards them. So you want more nuclear power output and then decentralize your system and get more renewable energy because it's locally produced, decentralized. So you can't like hit one whole power generation. If you get wind turbines and solar panels on schools and hospitals and whatnot, then you can release pressure on the central grid. I'm not talking from an environmental point of view, although that's obviously beneficial. I'm talking from a security point of view. Decentralize power, but also more nuclear. Ukraine announces it will quadruple nuclear power energy while Russian missiles target the power grid. The plan finished Soviet-era reactors abandoned in the 1980s and then add American-designed units. The goal extends beyond energy independence, capturing Russia's energy export revenues across Europe. And they are doing both those things, by the way. They are building more renewables and they are looking at increasing nuclear. Okay, so life under occupation, says Tim White. So we know in Donetsk City, they are struggling really to get hold of water. Now they can't even get hold of emergency services. Incidentally, this is one of the numbers to call in an emergency, 103. Though there's little point, it seems, in the Donetsk People's Republic. First there's no water, now no one bothers to pick up emergency calls for an ambulance. It's not an isolated incident, but here we have a 1-minute 4 video of ringing the emergency services and no one picks up. And at the end of the video, no one picks up. So I presume no one picked up at all. 1 minute and 4 seconds. Or possibly just no one picks up. Right, Russia's new Max Messenger app. So we now understand that Telegram and WhatsApp have been fully cancelled in Russia, and they have instead a Max Messenger app, which the government is trying to force people to use instead of Telegram and WhatsApp. It's reportedly systematically spying on its users. It accesses and records all processes on a phone, checks what apps are installed, and leaks unsent texts. So this is very similar to what happens in North Korea. The Russian government's recent decision to block Telegram and WhatsApp audio and video calls as an apparent prelude to formally banning both apps has caused chaos in Russia as virtually the entire population uses the 2 apps. In place of WhatsApp and Telegram is attempting to push people to the new app called Max, developed by Russian social media company VK. It is intended to become a national messenger app similar to WeChat in China, where Telegram and WhatsApp are already banned, so on and so forth. So I won't go into any more details there, but you can imagine that is not great. Now, I talked yesterday on a live chat that a bit of a problem. Donald Trump appears to be wanting to stop all mail-in ballots and get rid of voting machines. Just paper ballots that you go and put in at a ballot box, right? Now, why am I talking about this? Because this is exactly what Vladimir Putin suggested at the Alaska summit. And Alexander Vindman said, who's Ukrainian origin, this is a perfect example of an effective influence campaign. CIA should be cacking themselves about this. So the US president has decided, although he's always been against these, he's not said anything about it for months. Goes to Alaska, meets with Putin. Putin triggers him with this, and then he comes out with policy directly to get rid of mail-in ballots and claiming that no one else uses them, even though dozens of countries use them, including the UK, and what he calls seriously controversial voting machines. So after meeting with Putin, where Putin questioned the legitimacy of mail-in ballots, Trump launches a campaign to end mail-in, and I don't think many people understand how easy it is to puppeteer Trump. So this is the Russian president influencing policy in the United States of America. And you should be deeply worried about that. Now, there's been talk about the flyover at Alaska that was insanely expensive, unnecessary. They rolled out the red carpet. Trump clapped Putin in, who's a murderous dictator, clapped him on the arms and shook his hand and smiled, and it was all laughs. Rolled out the red carpet, US soldiers on their knees rolling out the red carpet for him, then takes him in his own vehicle and drives him around and gives him an honorary flyover, has a luncheon that was eventually cancelled, but is to your excellency, President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin, and then wants to give him a gift, although that was cancelled. The honorary flyover that Trump did for Putin cost, for the B-2 stealth bomber in the middle there alone, $2,080,000. We spent $2 million for Trump to honor and legitimize a mass murdering war criminal. It cost $130,000 per hour to fly that thing, and it came all the way from Missouri. So just that alone, you're complaining about stuff going on in, I don't know, homeless people in Washington. There's $2 million you didn't need to spend, and go and spend that on the homeless people. Scott Bessent has been kind of pressured on stuff like this. Alaska was a show of force by Trump, he says. He displayed a huge amount of military hardware and then did a flyover. It was kind of like, but you know, so Bessent is saying that this is a good thing. Like, it's a show of force, of strength. It's kind of like inviting your uncontrollable neighbor to your house and showing him your gun case. You could interpret it like that. I don't know. I have to say that the whole thing to do with the meeting last night, I'm not going to show you this, but this is a really good video between Chris Cuomo and Stephen Smith, where Stephen Smith says, and Chris Cuomo as well, saying, what the hell are the Americans? What are we concentrating on what Zelensky is wearing? He's got more important things to consider. Why are we so selfish to think that whether you're wearing a suit and tie is important when this guy's at war? And it's a really good video that goes to the heart of the matter of like the superficiality of people's concerns. Right. So yesterday was a bad day for Putin, says Politico. Trump, for the first time, voiced the US's readiness to provide Ukraine with serious security guarantees, which the Europeans called a breakthrough. Trump and Putin had a separate 40-minute conversation, but the US president did not publicly announce any concessions to the Kremlin, so no sanctions. And in fact, the security guarantees Trump has now claimed will not include American troops. So no US troops on the ground in Ukraine. It will just be European. The Americans are just going to coordinate it. Trump's position shifted towards the West, which restored a sense of unity in the transatlantic alliance. That last bit is the main thing that came out of yesterday, as my analysis showed. Zelensky must show flexibility in the issue of compromises on territories, Trump has subsequently said. Ukraine joining NATO was always a no-no for the Russians, be it in the form of the Soviet Union or Russia. This was long before Putin. So he's reiterating they can't join NATO and that they are going to have to give up territory. So already, since the European leaders had left, Trump is going slightly back to his default position of regurgitating Russian talking points. Trump on Zelensky and Putin, maybe they're getting along a little better than I thought. I hope Putin is going to be good. If he's not, it's going to be a rough situation. So we'll have to wait and see how effective yesterday was. Some marginally good signs came out from yesterday, but if Trump's already just starting to regurgitate Kremlin talking points is a bit of a problem. It's been a long one today. Lots to talk about. Hope that was acceptable for you guys. Take care, and I'll speak to you soon.